So that's good for you guys. Anyone watching this video, you should be here. There's muffins and juice in the soda. Or if you're watching this later, you're missing out on the juice and muffins. So, well, first of all, I always go through a few slides. Is my volume too loud, or is that just me in my ear? Okay. I usually go through, a description of Blomquist Hale and what we do as an employee assistance program. I'm going to click through that real quick. You're welcome afterwards if you have any questions about our service or about how things work. Come up and talk with me. Happy to answer your questions one-on-one. But we'll get to the meat of our presentation here. So super fast. If you'd like, really, our website is we've revamped it recently. We have a ton of great resources just in general about mental health, about wellness, improving your health, getting along with other people, you name it. And we're always building that resource. So go to our website. You can learn about all of our therapists. You can look at all the resources we have, and it's another excellent place for you guys to gain what you need. So, all right, well, let's talk. Today we're talking about sexual harassment, discrimination. How many of you have ever participated in one of these trainings before? Has anyone never participated in a sexual harassment training or discussion through work before? Anyone? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why do we have these types of presentations? Any thoughts on that? What was that? Okay, you bet. I need a job. I need a job. Definitely, I need a job. But there are lots of things I could be talking about, right? And this is typically a required training annually in every employment. Excuse me. So why? Why do we do it? Definitely. So he said people are dumb enough to sexually harass. So I think there's some truth to that statement, because I think all of us, especially in professional situations in any career, have been through some sort of training like this before and can articulate, can say what I should or should not do with my coworkers. But when it comes to action, those things don't always translate. And whether it's a intelligence thing or whether it's a poor impulse control, or there are those kind of purposeful perpetrators as well, there's a need for this training. So how many of you did not see someone lose their job this last year because of sexual harassment? Did you ever watch the news?
I don't watch much.
Okay, good for you. Good for you. Good for you. 2017, of course, very precedented. All of these media moguls and movie stars and professional people, allegations. You watched the Golden Globes on Sunday, and it was very heavily themed towards sexual harassment. So, are these new topics? Are these new, are we surprised that this is happening? No, this has been around forever. At some point, we finally got wise and made some laws about it. But still it happens. That's why we have this training, unfortunately. That's why we have this training. So our goal today is to talk about sexual harassment and discrimination. Hopefully, this will be a repeat in some form for you. That's good. That's what we're here for. It's been said before. So what that means then is this doesn't just have to be a repeat. We can talk about things. This can be a discussion. Nate says I have to repeat what you tell me, but I can do that. So if we have questions, if we have concerns, we don't have to follow my slides in order. I'm happy to participate in discussion on pertinent topics, whether those are county-wide or whether those are worldwide. but it's an important topic to discuss, and we can't ignore it. Even if I sit here and I have to participate in this training myself, even though I give it, I still have to look at that and say, okay, well, what's part of this? What's my part in this, in my company? At the end of the day, that's what I want you to leave with. What's my part in this? I can't maybe I can in some form, have some influence on my peers. But I'm ultimately responsible for my behavior and how that is accepted and perceived by other people. So at the end of the day, a reminder of us taking responsibility for ourselves and making sure that the workplace at Box Elder County is healthy and happy-ish. There's a lot going on in the county. So, all right, well, let's talk here. Some of the laws you've probably heard before that fit in under this category of discrimination, sexual harassment. Title VII, Civil Rights Act. So this is the prohibition against discrimination based on everything: race, color, sex, religion, national origin. And we could probably add 1,000 things to that. There's always something that makes us different than someone else. We can't discriminate. Pregnancy Discrimination Act, not just about pregnancy, but other also medical conditions. We can't discriminate. Age discrimination, and then of course the Americans with Disabilities Act. Anyone not heard of those before or have any questions about those laws? If so, I'm sure you've got a lawyer around here somewhere that would be happy to. You can just Google it and you find your resources. But those are powerful laws that have been around for some years, decades, and you'd be surprised at how little sometimes people realize that. For some people, they're like, "Oh, this is a new thing," because they're seeing it on TV more so to this last year. All right. So we're going to kind of break things down into two categories. We'll talk about sexual harassment, and then we'll talk about discrimination. Although the topic or the concepts of these two topics are interrelated, and you'll see that. But we will kind of break it down into those two separate sections. How many of you have ever spent time like, you know what, I really would like to know the official definition of sexual harassment? Do you guys look in dictionaries and legal documents and like, I really would like to know that? Well, you're welcome. Look at this. Isn't that beautiful? Right? And it's all inclusive. Listen to this. Any behavior, definition of sexual harassment, any behavior or conduct of a sexual or gender-based nature which is demeaning, ridiculing, or derisive, and results in a hostile, abusive, or unwelcome work environment. There weren't very many exclusions in that. You see I underlined ors and ands. There were a lot of inclusions. And I think that's an important concept. Any thoughts on that? Does any of those words stick out? Anything new or different than what you've heard before? We're going to go through some of these behaviors, give you some recommendations as a result of that. So just because sexual harassment is not just about sex, the physical acts of sex. It's also about gender. That's sex. So it's not just sexual behavior, it's also gender-based kind of discrimination, harassment. We'll talk very clearly about those. So it can include things like unwanted or unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Unwelcome sexual advances, pretty clear. Request for sexual favors, fairly clear. We're going to go through some examples. This last one is kind of the catch-all. So verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. That one's a little more broad. That one's we're going to have to define that. We're going to have to break that into some pieces here. So there's no hard and fast rule. There's not just, there's a list and that's all. It's ever changing. There's always new information we can add to this. So what are some things that you've heard about either on the news or in your own work experiences that might be considered verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature in the workplace? How many of you have ever seen, what's that TV show with Ham? That's his last name. Mad Men? You know, like that kind of stereotypical, you know, the man is the boss and the woman is the secretary, and they're always having a sexual relationship. You know, it's even in media that way. What do you think? Can you think of any other examples? You don't have to rat anybody out, but what are some things you've heard that have gotten people in trouble at work? Nobody? Well, maybe I'm special. Maybe I'm biased. I've heard a lot. Well, here's a list of some examples. One of the ones that there was when I worked at a hospital, there was a male nurse, and his thing was he had arthritis in his hands. He was 60-some years old, and so he would go around the unit, and you'd kind of come up behind him and be like, "All right, Corey, it's your turn." And he'd start giving you a shoulder massage, and he did it because it helped him to keep his hands loose, and he would tell people that. But it became this kind of, you know, he lost his job, I'll tell you that, as a result, because someone was uncomfortable, right? Because someone was uncomfortable. So you think about that. A shoulder massage, like, how many of you have ever had a shoulder massage before, right? From a friend or a coworker? Well, yeah?
I'm all for it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Diane's all for it. But it can be something even less, you know, in that one we can tell just because of the physical contact of a massage, you can tell that one's definitely in this kind of more dangerous ground than not. But look at some of these things on the list, you know. These are pretty common things that happen in the workplace. I don't know if you recognize that or have seen that yourselves. But as simple as, you know, asking someone on a date could be considered sexual harassment. We're going to talk about some dynamics of this, of course. My job is to kind of get you to be a little leery. But at the end of the day, I don't want you to feel like I can't go to work. Like I'm either going to get in trouble or someone's going to harass me, right? There's some discussion we're going to have here, but I do want to emphasize that it is dangerous ground, and we have to be very responsible for our actions. Just commenting on the way clothing fits or looks on somebody. Anyone been complimented? New hairstyle or new shoes or things like that?
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet.
We're not allowed to give compliments?
No, I like it.
Has society become that sensitive?
Yes and no. And we're going to talk in the next...
On how you do it.
Yes, it depends on how you do it, but also how it's received, and knowing the person that you're doing it, that you're giving those compliments to, and making sure that that's consensual, and that it's clear and understood that it's not something else. And one of the other things we'll talk about is that it seems like it, whether that's because of the media or especially this last year, it seems like if I make a mistake, I'm going to lose my job. That's possible, but typically that's not the way that sexual harassment policies work. If I make a mistake and it was non-intentional and someone told me to stop and I stopped, I'm typically okay.
That's my question about the nurse. Did anybody ever tell him that what he was doing was inappropriate and appreciated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was counseled by management to stop. Yes. Very good. Thank you for asking that. So the question was, did the nurse I gave the example of, was he told to stop? And he was, yes. Yep. Good. Very good. So yes, I'm here to kind of get your mind thinking, oh boy. But at the same time, by the end, I want you to still feel empowered and comfortable to come to work. That's a tricky balance that we have to play with there. But great questions, good comments. I like it. Standing too close. There's a Seinfeld episode where they have a close talker. I don't know if you've watched Seinfeld. Some people are okay with that. Some people are not. Yeah. Giving gifts. We just came through the holiday season. How many of you received gifts from a coworker? All of us, probably, in some form. Does that mean every gift is a sexual harassment? There you go. There you go. But the topic is that it depends, and it's in the eye of the beholder. So maybe, but we have to be sensitive to that. I have to be thoughtful of that in my actions. Okay. So the question on nicknames, corrupting the name that's up here. The problem with that one is that sometimes nicknames are created without people's consent. I remember when I was, how old was I? 10? And we had a friend by the name of Steven. And I don't remember how it even started, but he got the nickname Stinky Steve. Okay? Yeah. And we kind of joked around right at recess and things. And I remember one day after school, his mom came up to me, and not just me, the other 4 or 5 of us friends, and she's like, "He does not like that, stop it." I never said it again. So we just have to be careful. We just have to be careful. It's, again, that consent issue. If I feel uncomfortable, if I feel like there's too much of a undertone to that, it's just a dangerous place. But it might be very okay. You know, in police departments, we tend to do that. We get to know somebody, we develop a relationship, we come up with these terms of endearment that are innocuous and they're fine. We just have to be sensitive and aware that that's a possibility. Okay, good. We could add 1,000 things to this list, some big, some small, but just to know, there's a lot of things that can be seen as verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Okay. So let's break down harassment into 4 different levels. So it's not just either I was sexually harassed or not. There are some distinctions. Okay. So level 1 here is sexual stereotyping. So this is any demeaning, ridiculing, derisive behavior directed towards another employee that is based on gender. Okay, so if someone is given a certain job that is demeaning based on their gender only, that's a form of sexual harassment. So the question usually comes up, so the secretary, receptionist, administrative assistant who always takes notes in meetings or gets coffee, does that mean that they're always being sexually harassed? What do you think? Excellent, excellent. If it's part of their job description, it is not sexual harassment. Now, of course, if you're taking a job as one of these support staff roles, and in that job description you don't read it and you find something that is inappropriate, well, I'm probably sure that still can be sexual harassment. But it might be wise to look at those things. If you're a supervisor, it might be good to look at some of those job descriptions that you have out there, and just be wise and insightful in terms of what we're expecting of people, and whether that's formally or informally. This could also fit in the form of hazing in some ways. Especially in some types of organizations, the new guy or the new girl. Well, we have to be careful with that. Those kind of initiation things, those kind of isolating and separating someone from the crowd makes people feel uncomfortable. And that's the bottom line, Any other thoughts on this? Level 1, sexual stereotyping. Has anyone ever, maybe it's not as big as it used to be in terms of, the kind of gender differences between jobs, but.
So isn't there a point between the new guy and the gal, however you want to say it, right? They are, like what Scott said, was such a sensitive type of person that they take a offense to near anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a point where the administrator has got to maybe talk to that person and say, hey, you're not always in the right in these situations?
I would hope so. The question for our viewing people is, if there is someone who is oversensitive and they're always offended, is there a way to handle that situation rather than everyone being charged with sexual harassment? I think the answer is yes, because the responsibility for sexual harassment reporting begins with the person that's being harassed in reporting that. And so hopefully, yes, in an ideal world, that there would be some investigation, there would be some, discussion. Okay, well, this person is saying stop. That's fair. Stop. Right? Or some conversation with that employee that say, hey, you know what? This is part of the job. You're gonna have to expect to be in close quarters with these people. And so yes.
So I assume that there's private conversations that happen between two people, and there's public conversations, and they're getting them all mixed up because, does that make sense?
Yes.
This sensitive person gets these
Yeah.
situations all mixed up, so I think there's probably a line that can be drawn.
There can be. But again, all of this comes back to perception.
Yeah.
And so even if, we're going to talk about that in a minute, even if someone's on the outside just kind of listening in on another group, if they're uncomfortable, that could be perceived as sexual harassment or discrimination. And so you're right. There can be, and hopefully we have, the administration and leadership support and just clear-headed people that are willing to talk to each other and sort these things out.
Or somebody be able to stand up for the other guy, right?
Or to stand up for the other guy. Exactly. Excellent discussion. I like that.
Okay, well, that was a general term, sorry. Yes. Thanks, Scott.
All right, let's talk level 2. So this is visual or verbal abuse, which is offensive or discriminatory to employee or group of employees. So this could include some double standard, gender discrimination, visual displaying of demeaning cartoons, nudity, pornography. How many times do you guys get emails from friends or family that you open at work? And there are those funny things, those memes or even text messages that you look on your phone, but you don't know who's looking over your shoulder. That could potentially be seen as making someone uncomfortable or demeaning.
Should they be looking at your personal stuff?
Well, hopefully not. The question is, should they be looking at your personal stuff? No. I've worked in a lot of places where I shared an office with somebody, and it wasn't on purpose, but we saw each other's stuff just because we're within 5 feet of each other. And so it's not usually that people are prying into your stuff. Just walking by and seeing that is part of what we're talking about here. Can be perceived as inappropriate. So this fits in the discrimination side of things as well. So it may be some funny joke. How many times, you don't hear them as many now, but when I was a kid, there were blonde jokes, there were Polish jokes, there were, you know what I mean? Yeah. And there's still some of that floats around. We have to be sensitive to that. Even if it's, we're in a group of people and we're all kind of like-minded people and we've had those kind of jokes 1,000 times before, we still have to be sensitive to that because we don't know if either someone that is new to the group or just walked by or could hear that or and it could be offensive. So we have to be sensitive. So that's level 2. So the first one is the sex role stereotyping, gender roles. And this one's specific visual and verbal interaction with people, not just an employee, but groups of employees as well. And so maybe we accidentally hit forward on an email or something of that nature, and it's got some derisive comments or inappropriate content. We have to look at that and be sensitive to that. So level 3 is when we get into the more targeted, specifically targeted. So the first one is kind of a gender, someone has some sort of bias towards another gender and they're demeaning that person as a result. Level 2 is kind of a broad, like, the things I say or do may be offensive to people in general, but not on purpose. And this one, the next 2 are kind of person specific, that there's a targeting that happens. And it could be visual or physical. So in the picture here you can see the massaging, And I don't know the details of why this nurse got fired, but my impression was that there was a nurse he returned to multiple times and maybe tended to massage her shoulders more often than others and had been told to stop, that it was uncomfortable. So this, again, could be videos, text messages, emails, jokes, verbal comments, unwanted physical touching of a non-criminal nature. We'll talk about that. Specific, directed towards a certain person. Okay? And this is the place where we actually start really kind of thinking about that as sexual harassment. The other 2 things, I think, are given a lot more leeway, but still have some dangerousness to them. This is where people typically start thinking this is what sexual harassment is. So, unwanted physical touching of a non-criminal nature. Any ideas what that means? What is non-criminal touching? Interesting concept. There you go. A pat on the head or the shoulder. Yeah. The massage thing we talked about. It might just be standing too close or brushing up against somebody. It could be a hug. That sounds offensive. A hug. Could be. Could be. We have to be sensitive to these things. Again, not how do I take it, but how might they take it? And I need to be responsible for how I'm perceived by other people. Okay. Any questions or thoughts on level 3 here? So level 4, again, then, now we move into the criminal touching. This is patting, touching, pinching, forcible sexual abuse, intentional touching of private areas. That one's pretty obvious. Most times people are like, yeah, that one's not okay. But the other ones, sometimes you see like, oh, I never thought of that before. But this one's like, no, that one's bad, which is true. This one's fairly obvious. Yeah. Criminal touching. So this is where it's actually not just against company policy, but it's actually against the law. You could be charged criminally for that kind of behavior. Okay, what do you think out of the 4 different breakdowns of sexual harassment? Any thoughts, questions, surprises, new information? Okay. So we've had a few of these conversations already. This idea that, does that mean that I'm going to screw up? That someone's going to accuse me of sexual harassment because of something innocuous? Is our world too sensitive? How do I know? Well, you're right. There are some hard and fast lines. We talked about, especially with the level 4 level. There are some laws that say that's not okay. But yeah, there's kind of a blurry line. There's not always a hard and fast rule about whether or not that was appropriate. And it comes down to consent. And I don't know if you've had in high school or in your health classes, or if you've had a sex education class, this topic of consent is sometimes challenged. You hear in the news of these statutory rape cases, where the perpetrator is saying, well, I had consent, and the victim is saying I didn't, or some of those things. And how do you actually distinguish that? Well, it's hard. It's hard. So you need to err definitely on the side of caution. But if the conduct is unwelcome or non-consensual, it is not okay, regardless of its content. And not from my perspective, but the people I'm interacting with. If it is welcome and consensual, it's not harassment. There was a dating couple in one of the places I worked. Some of the stuff they did at work would have been sexual harassment for anybody else, but they were in a consensual relationship. One of them had to be transferred out eventually, but right? And so it was consensual. So we have to be sensitive to that. And
When you cross that line, when we get in the fight that night, and then now all of a sudden,
yes,
now there's liability on that employee.
Yep.
or hers.
And this is why,
Allowed it.
yeah. So the question,
I would say whether they're dating or not should not be allowed, period.
most companies do have a policy that prohibits dating, marriage relationships even, in between employees. That typically they have to disclose that they have to be transferred out or transitioned, especially if one of the two is a supervisor over the other. Because you're right, the comment was made, well, what happens? The liability is always there, even if you're in a consensual relationship, that could change because I had a fight last night. And so you're right. We err on the side of caution, and we have to kind of work from this perception of avoiding even the appearance of evil to protect ourselves and our companies from those false accusations or allegations. But we have to work from the other person's perspective. And that's always that. So it can be formal or clunky, but maybe once in a while we have to ask, is this okay? Hey, you know what? I gave you this card that had this joke in it. And come to think of it, I'm not sure that was okay. I hope you're not offended. That was not in my intention. What do you think? How did you take that? And be open. Hopefully the other person will say, hey, that was okay. Or they'd say, no, you know what? I was uncomfortable with that. You say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. That'll never happen again, right? Well, we're doing our best there. But we don't always do that in relationships. We don't always specifically ask for consent. We often infer consent, which is normal and typical, but dangerous. We just have to be aware of that. Okay, any questions about this blurry distinction, this idea of unwelcome, non-consensual stuff?
This is the part that is being around elected officials to a point when at the first of everything is everybody's on a good term and everybody gets along, and then by the end of a term, that line becomes, at the first you're in your honeymoon stage and then now things are moving on. That blurry line, that's where that harassment really comes in, because first they didn't mind it at first.
Yeah.
We got along good, but then all of a sudden now, 2 years later, hey, this isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
So it's like, that person can't have both. So that's what is confusing to me.
Well, and so the comment being made here is that this idea of consent and unwelcome behavior changes over time. And you're right, that it seems dangerous and unfair sometimes that someone can change their mind, in essence, and then later accuse someone of misdoing, and especially in the political realm, as you're talking. But as you notice, even in the news and things like that, these people that have lost their jobs, whether that was consensual or welcome back then and now it's not, some of these people have lost their jobs, but there's a lot of people that have not, right? And so there still is an investigation process, policy in place, hopefully, to protect people from that. But so from my perspective, if I'm protecting myself from misdoing, well, I'm being sensitive to how I'm interacting with people, and I have a standard for myself. So even though it seemed consensual back then, it's probably not wise for me to engage in that behavior with.
I guess I'm trying to say
Yeah.
it shouldn't be allowed even though it's
Yes.
consensual.
Hopefully that politician or that public figure can have boundaries enough with themselves to know that they need to protect themselves, if nothing else, because they're in a more public eye. And so we have to set those boundaries for ourselves up front. And that I'm the only one that can do that for myself. And if I do it, hopefully I have the evidence to support, that I'm not doing, making poor decisions that way. But you're right. It's in the eye of the beholder, and that's what makes this a regularly discussed topic, is that it's always around us, and it's always possible. Okay. So in terms of sexual harassment, typically this idea that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. Statistically, that is true, although it doesn't have to be that way. It can be the other way around. Or it can be between two men or two women as well. But stereotypically, we kind of say, okay, well, that pedophile guy, that creepy guy in the office, that's who I'm thinking of. But it may not be. It could be someone we never thought or guessed or didn't seem to be fit a certain protocol. So we have to look at that. Typically, complaints that are filed, 85% of them are filed by women, 15% by men, although that number's been increasing. I think the difference here is culturally, if a woman makes advances on a man, that's thought of as like, go dude, right? And so men don't typically see that as being sexually harassed. But you flip the tables, and it might be different. And that can maybe a cultural distinction. Maybe it's much more even, 50-50. We don't know. People that file complaints are typically more women. 78% of women who are polled report that they've been sexually harassed at one point in their career. That's a lot. 80%? That's pretty frustrating. If I were looking for a job or had been harassed in the past, to live a way that I thought that could happen again. That's our responsibility as coworkers, is to make sure that we're on the up and up, and so that we all feel comfortable at work. Doesn't mean that we don't disagree or that we have conflict, but in general, we feel safe at work. We feel comfortable at work. 11% of men report being harassed during their career. Here's some words you've probably heard before. Quid pro quo. Anyone know what that stands for? Yep. It's this kind of give and take relationship, right? So, stereotypically, harassment is this supervisor says, hey, I'll give you this promotion if you have sex with me. This for that. It could be less than that. It doesn't have to be sex necessarily. It might be gender specific. It could be related to, it's lost the word, secrecy kind of things. Not giving a reward for something, but giving a threat to not talk about something as well. So again, the unwelcome sexual conduct or advances in exchange for different employment terms. It could be between employees. It doesn't even have to be, we'll talk about that more in a minute. But typically this is when there is a division between leadership position and the employee. These kind of things typically happen. Raises, advances, special privileges, those kind of things. The court can assume quid pro quo even if the victim voluntarily submits. So even though the victims did it, that they agreed to the terms that was established by that supervisor, they can still be charged with sexual harassment because of the detrimental nature of the power differential between a supervisor and their employee. They're protected regardless. They don't have, just like in consent laws, that at a certain age, the state says you're not able to give consent. Typically, people not in power have some protections in place that way. Any questions about quid pro quo? This one comes up. This is a pretty common phrase that's used in sexual harassment training. Hostile work environment. Anyone ever heard that word before? Those three words before? That one's kind of trendy sometimes. But in its base, it's unwelcome sexual conduct that, one, unreasonably interferes with person's work performance and creates a work environment that is hostile, offensive, or threatening. And this could happen by anyone. It doesn't have to be supervisor to employee. It could be employee to employee. Or, here's an example. I worked with a young woman who was in a beauty college. And one of the vendors that would come in and sell them product was sexually harassing many of the people in the college. And she was brave enough to report it, and were able to take care of that relationship with that vendor. So it wasn't even within her organization or college. It was someone that was coming in but was part of that's still considered sexual harassment. Hostile work environment. Okay. So some things to avoid. This is the do not do list, okay? Telling or emailing sexually explicit, demeaning jokes, or using innuendo. That's pretty broad. There's a lot of humor that's involved in those. And we need humor. We need to laugh. We need to get along with each other in stressful situations and just not getting burned out at work. But we got to be very careful with the humor that we use. Making repeated requests for a date. So if someone says no, bottom line, accept it at face value. The terms of endearment can be dangerous. This fits in with the nickname idea that we don't know how it's going to affect someone. And we just have to be sensitive to that. Inappropriate comments about dress or appearance. Again, a dangerous place because multiple people in this room are like, hey, I like when I get compliments. That helps me to feel good about work. But there's going to be one person that says, you know what, I didn't like that. So we just have to be careful. Of course, discussing sex, sexual thoughts, fantasies, and activities, that's not appropriate at work. Leering or making cat calls, unwelcome touching, being too close, displaying sexually illicit videos, magazines, cartoons, or calendars that show scantily dressed people. Not appropriate for work. You never know who's going to be looking over your shoulder at any given time. Even if it is on your cell phone these days in a text message, you still have to be sensitive to that. Be careful. Of course, we've talked about this one a lot because of my nurse friend that got fired. Here's some discrimination stuff. Of course, treating 8 different ages differently. I worked for a company and the business manager, this woman, was ageist. She treated people under the age of 30 different than older. When I turned 30, her relationship with me changed almost overnight. It was really weird. Yeah. Yeah. Making decisions and job assignments on age, kind of mimicking or mocking someone's, cultural or ethnic differences, slaying derogatory terms, telling jokes, making comments that are focused on religion, race, speculating about someone's mental health condition, even in jest. Maybe I'm biased because of the field I'm in. We do that all the time, us therapists we got to be careful with that. Just because I have that information in my head doesn't mean I should joke about it to my coworkers, right? Or even, if you find out someone's got a medical condition, sharing that information with someone else could be seen as hostile work environment or leading to creating a hostile work environment. And there's a lot of liability in this. And this is why we do this presentation, to help mitigate Box Elder County's liability, because you guys are acknowledging that you know this information, that you're going to follow their policy. But if we're not responding as supervisors, as companies, to allegations, then we could be liable. We have to make sure we're doing that. So what is the policy here at Box Elder County for reporting sexual harassment discrimination? What do you do if you see it or it's done to you? Talk to your supervisor. He pointed at his supervisor. Good. And then what happens, typically? Yep, goes up the chain. An investigation takes place, and appropriate action hopefully is taken. Whether that's just a conversation to get people to clear up some miscommunication, or whether that leads to someone getting corrective action or losing their job. Yeah.
What if it's your supervisor?
That's the next question I was going to ask. Diane says, well, what if your supervisor is the harasser discriminator? What do you do next? Okay, go to the county attorney? Maybe. He's a good guy. So go to the guy that's the best. Yes, you might need a lawyer, I guess. But you can skip. You don't have to go directly to your supervisor with this type of issue. It's not a chain of command specific response. Yes, you're right. Very good, very good. Oh, that was the next slide. I should have clicked it. So not only if it's happening to me, but if I see it or hear it, I need to report it in some way. And we need to take everything seriously. Even if we have this kind of oversensitive person who is offended by everything, we still need to take it seriously. Because at the very least, that person is going to recognize we're taking it seriously and then still feel like they can be part of the team. And that's important. There are laws against reprisal, retaliation. So if you report sexual harassment, discrimination, and you get retaliation back from that supervisor, from that coworker, whatever, that's against the law. It's not okay. And that definitely needs to be reported as well. And that could just be exclusion. All of a sudden this person doesn't talk to me anymore. Leaves me out of important projects that I'm supposed to be part of. That can fit in that acts of reprisal. Again, comes back into that umbrella term of hostile work environment. Some ideas about different dimensions of diversity. Could be all of these things. We could add lots to this. Age, race, gender, ethnicity. That's everything. We could, according to this list, all of us in this room are different in some way. And if I find that out and I treat you differently as a result of that, that can be discrimination. So here's a question for you. What do you think are the most common discrimination claims filed with the Labor Commission? So we're not talking about sexual harassment necessarily. This is discrimination. What do you think? What do you think the top one or two claims filed with the Labor Commission are in terms of sexual orientation? Anyone? Disability? Age? Anyone agree or disagree otherwise? All of them. Good answer. He's learning. He's learning. We have succeeded in this presentation because he knows, don't do it, report, be sensitive to all of this. Excellent. It's religion. The number one claim filed doesn't mean that that's the number one way people are discriminated, but the number one claim filed with the labor of commission is religion. Number 2 is disability. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So does that mean that we have to be perfect? I have to somehow know the ins and outs of everybody's culture, ethnicity, religion, so that I don't say something wrong, so I don't offend them, so that they don't get upset. How come? Why don't we have to be perfect? You're shaking your heads. What do you think? It's not possible. It's not possible, right? Even though looking at us all in this room, we're fairly homogeneous. We look similar. There's differences among us. It's not possible, really, and I'm going to make mistakes because I'm human. So does that mean, again, that I'm going to get fired, that I'm going to lose my job or go to jail if I make a joke and screw up or offend somebody? Not necessarily. It's possible, but not necessarily. But we need to be, again, sensitive and take responsibility for that. Do my best to know the people I work with, the different parts. You don't have to know them, all the ins and outs, but basically kind of get a sense for what's important to people and honor that. Be responsible for yourself. If you make a mistake, apologize. Don't do it again. People are usually forgiving. You know? From a perspective of someone who is the victim of sexual harassment, the first step in them reporting is to say stop. And then go to your supervisor. So if I'm offended, I need to tell somebody. It doesn't have to be a big show. You don't have to be angry or upset necessarily, and it probably suggests that you take a few minutes to cool off before you talk to somebody if you've been offended. But you go to that person and you say, hey, you know what? That was offensive. I'd appreciate it in the future if you didn't make that joke. How many of us, 99% of us, if one of our coworkers came and said that to us, we would be glad that they did. And we would change. So it's okay to make mistakes. Take responsibility for yourself and trust, hopefully, that your coworkers have some forgiveness in them. But if we're not taking responsibility, if we're not changing our ways, there's not going to be forgiveness. And that's an important key. We got to treat each other well. Be willing to take responsibility for how I affect other people. I think that's a better definition of empathy than walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. For me to recognize his experience, how I fit into that, and me being responsible for how I affect him. That's empathy. Not wanting him to have a negative experience because of me. That's empathy. And that's what we're looking for. All right, let's see. Stereotypes are dangerous. It excludes people, it isolates people. At the very bare minimum, it interferes with us to work as a team. And from a company standpoint, from a corporate standpoint, that's detrimental. What happens if we don't work well as a team? Well, we don't get things done on time. That costs money. Hiring and firing costs. That's money. Legal litigation. That's money. That's what the corporate world comes down to. But how many have ever had a job where Sunday night rolled around and you had that anxiety in your gut, like, oh, I do not want to go to work? If nothing else, let's be part of an organization. Do my part in that organization to mitigate that so people want to come to work. Because you've also had those jobs where you're like, all right, I get away from my kids, go to work. Sorry. Hopefully no one in my family sees this video. No, just kidding. We talked about that stuff. Okay. So here's some general idea of how much hard costs sexual harassment discrimination costs a company. 30 to 40% of supervisors and managers' daily activities are usually spent dealing with conflict. Companies are paying for that. So if everyone got along, what would those supervisors be doing? Improving the productivity and motivating people, all that leadership stuff that managers get all excited about but never get to do. $700,000 is the average jury award in wrongful termination suits. Who pays that? The company. 80,000 Equal Employment Opportunity Commission discrimination charges are filed annually. How much does that cost our government for the Labor Commission to function? I don't know what their budget is. $162,000 is the average cost of litigation for an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission claim. $58,000 average amount paid on a sexual harassment complaint. I work with a lot of small organizations. 60 grand is not something that most people can fork out. Company can't survive those things a lot of times. 55% of employment claims result in money awards to employees. So not all of them, but more than half. $2.5 million is the average amount of punitive damages awarded in employment cases. That's a lot of money. So it can be damaging in a lot of ways, not just as an organizational level, but a government level, just from a financial standpoint. So the soft costs, of course, there's distraction, lower morale. Insurance premiums go up because people are utilizing their doctors and their medical and health insurance and to deal with stress and all of that. Reputation can plummet. There's a potential for copycat lawsuits. You see this, someone comes out with an accusation and 4 other people say, oh yeah, that happened to me. And it probably did. But now we've got 4, well, I think they combine those things, but now we've got 4 times as opposed to 1. Things compound pretty quickly. It's hard to bring an employee in. Bringing a new employee in that's of good quality, if our reputation's out there that we discriminate or that we harass. And that's difficult. That's a cost. So recommendations in our last couple minutes. Be aware how my physical gestures, eye contact, silence, and other nonverbal communication affects other people. How do I present to other people? Do I know that? Look in the mirror and practice a little bit. That'd be fun, right? Be aware of the differences in your physical space and your own. Sometimes we don't, especially if we've been around people for a while, those kind of boundaries get lax and they get shorter. And most of the time that's okay. We have to be careful. Be sensitive to assistive devices, wheelchairs, prosthetics, etc. Someone who has a disability, without asking. So does that mean that we shouldn't be aware and supportive in helping people with disabilities to have better access to things? No. But we need to ask, because maybe it's offensive to them that you see them in a way that they have to be helped when they can do it themselves. We have to be sensitive to that. Even if you're knowledgeable about someone's culture, don't assume that you know everything and can therefore make certain jokes or comments and not offend. Be aware of your location. How the accessibility of furnishings communicate your awareness with people of different ages, disabilities, religious differences, all of that. All of that. This one's hard because we usually don't think about humor. But think about the meaning and intentions in your humor. And sometimes that might be after the fact. You say something, you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that. Okay, let's go apologize. Let's take responsibility for it. Try and have some time where you're critically thinking about how people see you, hear you, verbal, nonverbal, your relationship with other people. Okay, we're at the end. Sexual harassment is a violation of one's civil rights. That's a pretty powerful statement. That something as innocuous, seemingly, as a joke or pat on the back could be a violation of someone's civil rights. It's pretty weighty, right? Pretty weighty. I want you to feel that weight for a minute. It's okay to feel that weight. You can be accountable. We can still have a good working experience and not have to feel this weight every day. Because, as this gentleman talked about back here, we're going to take responsibility for that. I'm going to set up boundaries for myself, and I'm going to live according to that, and I don't have to worry. I'm not going to be accused. And I know also, in my organization, I can trust, hopefully, that there is a policy to protect me if I were to be a victim of some of these things. And I can have the courage, therefore, to stand up for my civil rights because of that. Okay. Thoughts, questions, concerns? Well,
Does profanity fall under harassment?
does profanity fall under harassment? Yes. Yes. Anything that makes someone feel uncomfortable and is unwelcome or non-consensual can. Yes. Yeah. So if you don't like it, say stop. If it keeps happening, talk about it some more. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to use profanity to stop it, right?
Maybe. Yes, sometimes we have to use, no. Let's avoid that. Let your supervisor decide that. Yeah. Okay. You bet. And if you have any questions about these things, please talk to your supervisors, talk to your human resources people. Call us. Call us. If you're concerned, what better way to use an employee assistance program than to come to a confidential, trained professional and discuss these issues and what I should do about them? Whether that's helping to resolve issues in your organization, or whether that's just to kind of deal with the emotional impact as a result. We're a resource for you. All you have to do is give us a call. Okay. Well, thank you guys for your participation. I think it was a great discussion. We look forward to the sheriff's office on Thursday. And again, if you weren't here, you missed out. The muffins are gone. Sorry.